Monday will mark 3 years since a condo collapse in Florida that killed nearly 100 people. 98 lives were lost when the 12-story oceanfront condo building in Surfside, known as Champlain Towers South, suddenly came crashing down. A memorial service Monday will honor the victims of the collapse, one of the deadliest ever in U.S. history. Do want to bring in Rabbi Yossi Harlig from Chabad of Kendall and Pinecrest, and also a Miami-Dade police chaplain. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here to explain a little bit more about what happened on that day 3 years ago.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, just walk me through what you remember about that day.
I remember at 5 a.m., my phone goes off and I see the head of the chaplain program asking all the chaplains to make their way to Surfside, which that's not a typical thing to call all chaplains at the same time. A building collapse. Like me and most other people who were driving out there were thinking that, a building under construction collapsed and maybe there's one or two victims who were, in that building. And when we pull up there, you could not believe your eyes what was going on over there. We saw first responders there. We saw a building. The part of the building was like a pancake, completely collapsed, like you see on the screen. And at that time, there were still family members standing there next to the building. I still remember one particular dad who lived from another part of the state was crying and saying, my son just came there for the night to stay with his friend to go the next day to a funeral. And he's in that building, and I want to climb in and pull him out. And there was a lot of chaos and confusion. Also, there was a lot of chaos and confusion who was in the building. Because at that time, it's not like a hotel that all the people that are in the building. So people really didn't know what was going on. They didn't know who was in the building. The first place we knew who was in the building is because people didn't show up at the synagogue. And these people in the synagogue said, oh, we know that person lived in the building. And we were telling the police and the fire first responders, a few people that we knew for sure were in the building. And then they moved the families away from that corner on 88th Street in Collins. They moved them like 3-4 blocks north. And I remember going there because they sent all the chaplains there, and the families were in desperation, confusion, and they were expecting, building collapse. We're in America. In a few hours, they're going to bring out their loved ones. They may be injured, but they'll be back together with them. So they were like, when are we going to see them? When are we going to see them? And at the same time, also, who was in the building? There were lines of people giving the names of the loved ones. There were like maybe 150 to 200 names in the beginning that people weren't sure they were in the building. So that's what I remember the first few hours of complete confusion, panic, concern. And we as chaplains were there really working between the first responders and also working with the families, because a lot of the families were Jewish and we needed the rabbis to be there on the scene also to kind of guide the first responders how to deal with the situation for the Jewish community.
How were you able to help those families? Because I know that there were, as you mentioned, hours upon hours of just waiting for any word, and for some people, days upon days. So how were you able to do what you could to help them, and how did it feel to be able to help them?
I mean, one of the most difficult things about this particular collapse, this particular scene was, it's not typical. Usually when there's, God forbid, a shooting, a few hours later, 24 hours later, everyone gets back their loved ones. Here, what was the most difficult part of this was day after day after day, going to meetings and waiting to find out, did you find our loved one? And they didn't have answers for them. And they were hoping upon hope to be there, to be able to bring back their family members. And we as chaplains, we had a responsibility of two roles. Number one is to be there with families. There's nothing really you could say at that moment. The pain and the anxiety and the worry is beyond anyone could even imagine. So we were there more with them, holding their hand and hugging them and just being there with them in the moment. And also they felt good knowing that we were on the scene also with the first responders. So we were going between the families and the first responders and making sure that when they finally bring out a body, that they do everything that's important to Jewish law, which is very comforting for families. And we were also there during notification when they let the family know that they found their loved ones. That was something that's very important. I remember the first few days, if you ask what I think back to, a few moments, the first few days, there was a lot of anger and disappointment on the first responders. They don't understand. We're in America. Why did we pull everyone out? And then first responders made a decision, which at that time, some people thought it was a wrong decision, but it turned out to be the right decision, is to take the families to the scene of this tragic place. We called it the Holy Pile because so many people died there. And the reason they brought them there is because they needed them to see with their own eyes what the pile looks like and understand why this is such a difficult scene to even bring out bodies. And I was at the scene when the families came there. They asked the chaplains to be there to pray there with them. It was very, very heart-wrenching, and I still get emotional thinking about that moment. Because remember, what was so difficult about the scene, you expect sometimes when a shooting happens, you expect accidents to happen. But you don't expect to be in Surfside, overlooking the water, in the most beautiful place in the world, and in the middle of the night, 1:20, you're living on the best views, and 1:21, you're in a pile and rubble and you're dead. And it was very difficult for families. And I remember coming to the scene right next to the building. They brought them there for the first time. They came there with buses, and the family stood there. And I remember the family members screaming out the names of the loved ones. It was so painful to watch it. It was so like you're literally crying watching that it's happening. And I still get emotional thinking about that moment. And then at the end of the hour, you see there was a calmness in the family. And I can see the difference when the family members, before they went to the scene and after they went to the scene. Before they went to the scene, there was a lot of us against you. You know, us, the victims and the families against the first responders. Why is it taking so long? You don't have your act together. And then when they left the scene, it was more, we're all one family. I literally was able to feel the energy in the room that was so different. It was like, we're all one big family. The first responders, the police and fire, working nonstop. The other part I remember that, you know, still is very vivid in my mind is when they switched, which was a very painful moment, from search and rescue to search and recovery. And I remember they also asked me then to lead the service for all the first responders. It was like maybe 1,000 all around. We had elected officials, you know, the governor and everyone, lieutenant governor was there. And we did that prayer. It was a very difficult prayer. But I remember right before that, I was upstairs in the hotel with a family member that found out that they found their loved one. And I remember the relief that they felt after 2 weeks. They found them. Obviously, they got the body. And I went downstairs to the room where at that time, I don't remember the number. Let's say they only brought out at 40%. There's still 50% of the crowd, of the families there in the room. And there was such sadness, like we're changing now from search and rescue to search and recovery. And I said, I never believed I'll be in a room where you tell them we found your loved one and returning them for a funeral. And there's a sense of relief and closure. And then going to the next room and telling them how sad it was that, yeah, they're still in this state of mind. And that was something that we had to go through 30 days straight. I don't think there's ever been another story like that, like every single day, to the point that I remember the last few days, I felt so sad for the last few families just sitting there and just hoping and waiting to have some type of closure.
My last question for you here. Tell me about Monday's service. I know that the victims are going to be honored there. Just tell me what folks can expect to experience.
You know, for family members, one of the most important things for them, and they keep telling me over and over again, I'm in touch with numerous of the families, is they don't want their loved ones to be forgotten. You know, year number one, everyone shows up there, the TVs are there, everyone's there. Year number two and number three, eventually people want to move on with their life. There's nothing more painful to know for a family member that at 1:19, the family was alive and vibrant, this individual, and at 1:21, they're in that rubble, as you see the picture on the screen, and completely forgotten in that rubble. It's important for them that the chaplains, the communities come back out and give them that support and love and tell them that loved ones that they lived till June 20, that day in 2021, they're still alive, they're still well, their impact they had in the world is something that we're always going to take with us and going to allow their soul and what they impacted in their lives to that day continue to impact the world. And we're going to be there with them throughout their journey in their life, and their loved ones will never be forgotten. And that's going to be a prayer, and I'm going to lead them with prayers, and there'll be talks about them. But really, it's about the hugs and the embrace that we say. We were there 3 years ago, 30 days every day together. We're still there with you in prayer and support and in love.
All right. Rabbi, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Obviously, you know, that service is going to be on Monday, and a lot of those families are, I don't want to say looking forward to it, but they do want to make sure that their loved ones are remembered. So thank you again for taking the time to join us here.